Each scale has its idiosyncrasies, and N-scale is no different. Today I'm going to talk about the unique parts of being an N-scaler, and some of these might be considered hot takes. My name is Jimmy, this is Coffee and Trains. I'm drinking some French roast coffee. Let's get to it.
This video is brought to you by Model Railroad Academy. Model Railroad Academy is your online resource for model railroad instructions, ideas, and information, with loads of tutorials and articles for model railroaders of every skill level. One of my personal favorites is Alan Keller's Great Model Railroads series. It is just so much fun to look at all of these different model railroads from all of these different great model railroaders and just get inspiration from those. Plus, you can find tutorials on everything from bench work to electronics to scenery, all sorts of things there. The first 1,000 people to sign up at the link in the description below will get a full year of premium membership to Model Railroad Academy for $1.49. Offer is valid for new members only.
If you want to see your name below, just like these guys right here, you can just tell me what kind of coffee you are drinking in the comments, and you might see your comment pop up. All right, let's get into some of the idiosyncrasies and uniqueness of N-scale. The most important thing is that it works. N-scale is the second most popular scale out there, and while it will most likely never overtake HO scale, it has done a lot of improving in terms of quality and availability, but with popularity comes new manufacturers and products, and along with this, some problems. This is why a locomotive's base functions in N-scale of moving and working as intended, or N-scale rolling stock just working as intended, is the most important thing over features like detail or any of that. I'm going to buy a locomotive if I have two that are the same ones right next to each other. I'm going to buy a locomotive that I know that works versus one that has maybe a bunch of features or extra detail that may not work. That is the most important thing. And while I am a millennial model railroader, I have been running N-scale since I was a kid in the 90s. I remember the jerky, loud engines and the toy-like freight cars that you had to hold your tongue right to keep rolling correctly. This is part of the reason that so many of us hold up Kato as the gold standard. They just work, and you don't have to worry about them at all. They're nice looking and detailed, but they're not the be-all end-all of features and detail. They're right in the middle, but they are the S tier of N-scale reliability. And I'd also put Atlas up there pretty close to that category too. So, and don't get me wrong, most of the model railroad manufacturers, they're hitting home runs. But the most important thing that they need to remember is make sure it works above anything else. You can lose maybe a few features, maybe a few lights, but make sure that thing runs great. Sound is not that big of a deal. Now stop. Do not rush to the comments with your pitchforks. I am still very happy that N-scale has sound and manufacturers take the time to offer sound models. I've got a lot of N-scale sound. It's just not as big of a deal in N-scale as it is with larger scales. There are times that sound in N-scale just does not sound as great as it does in other scales. There are some really good sounding engines out there. I'm thinking of some of my Scale Trains engines with factory installed sound decoders and speakers. My Broadway Limited sound really good. But there are also just some of the physics that are involved with a small speaker that are just not going to allow for a satisfying sound. It's just a product of the size. This is why I like that some manufacturers like Broadway Limited and Atlas are placing speakers in their DCC-ready engines. That way you know you have the best possible sound. A lot of times this is the exact same setup they have for their sound-equipped locomotives, so you know if it's what they're using, it's what they assume is going to work best. Now, what I would say is that a good portion of my fleet is non-sound, and I also tend to run engines with the sound off quite a lot. N-scale sound is just not as big of a deal it is in HO or O scale, and that's just because really with the size you can't quite get the quality that you can with larger scales. Detail is great, but not that great. Manufacturers have made some amazing strides in N-scale detail from when I started in N-scale to now. It is simply mind-blowing what they're doing now. But here's the thing. There's such a thing as the law of diminishing returns, and when it comes to N-scale detail, I'm frankly not sure how much more detail can be crammed into some of these in-scale locomotives. Like, if you look at a scale train's rivet counter, I never thought we would even get to that level of detail in scale. Not to mention just even like working past it. What they're doing is insane. And I don't know how much more detailed they can get to the point where you're having to use a magnifying glass to see just the amount of work they put in, which is amazing. And I want to applaud them for doing that. But I think we're reaching the peak of enjoyable detail in scale. I'm not sure if we can get much more there. I look at it the same way I look at an 8K TV. Yeah, it's great. But my eye isn't going to notice the difference between that and a 4K TV unless it's a really big TV. In the same way, I'm not going to notice a difference in the detail unless it's a larger locomotive like HO scale or O scale. I'll be interested to see what details that they are adding on. I'm really excited to see what kind of things they're able to add to N scale that may be features that are only HO scale right now. I think it'd be interesting to see if they can figure out how to get smoke units into diesels so that they can have exhaust like we're starting to see in HO scale. Obviously, they're starting to get more smoke in N scale with Broadway Limited. It'll be interesting to see where the N scale market progresses in terms of the detail and features they're adding, because I really think they're reaching the peak of detail that they can offer in scale. Now, will it become where we're just doing more prototypically accurate details where we're able to like match the paints better and things like that? Maybe that's the way it'll go. But I think in terms of features and individual details, in terms of molded on parts and things like that, we're really reaching the peak level of N scale right now. We're usually space constrained in some form. Now, most of us get into N scale not because of availability, obviously, because if you're doing that, you're doing HO scale, but because of space. Whether it's we only have a corner of a room to make a small loop, or we want a large railroad and we don't have the space to do it in HO scale, N scale's ultimate compromise is size and space. The reason a lot of us pick N scale is space. I started in N scale as a kid because I only had a 4x4 card table to do trains on. We love scenery. With the lesser amount of space that is needed to do N scale model railroading comes the option to fill a space with some great scenery. Whether it's mountains, fields, towns, you name it. We can have more of it in N scale in the same amount of space. On my last layout, I was able to build an entire mountain with a massive cutout that appeared to be blasted through, all in a 2-foot by 2-foot space, and I was super happy with that. Let's say, for instance, you want to do a 1-foot deep shelf layout. You're going to be able to get roughly double the scenery in N scale, as it's 54% the size of HO scale. I can fit an entire town scene with some depth to it in a 1-foot space in N scale, or even a whole yard in a 1-foot space in N scale. If you like expansive scenery, N scale is going to be the way to go, especially if you're space constrained. We tend to lean more towards diesel. I personally have a lot of N scale steam, but there is nowhere near the selection of N scale steam when compared to HO scale. The reasons for this are the same reasons we don't have steam anymore in the real world. Diesel engines are simpler than steam engines. They don't have as complicated a mechanism, and they're easier to maintain. Now, you combine this fact with the size of N scale, and that makes those steam engines harder to manufacture and more fragile to run. I know typically, if an engine's going to break, it's probably going to be a steamer in N scale. You will see fewer steam engines in N scale than in most larger scales for these reasons, which is why we tend to lean more towards diesel. Also, the simpler mechanism makes them less likely to break, and if you go back to the first reason, we just want it to work. We love long trains. There's a saying, O scalers model engines, HO scalers model trains, N scalers model railroads. While the truth is nowhere near as cut and dry, N scale does have more opportunity to run large trains like you'd see on a main line of a Class 1. This all returns to the space factor. When we have the space to run long trains, we're going to want to run long trains. And N scale is going to give you that opportunity in significantly less space. A great example is in my railroad that I'm building here, the prototype has an 80-car grain train that goes once a week. Now, I'm not going to be doing 80 cars on here, although I technically could. I will be having 20 or 30 on that, and that's a pretty long train for model railroading. And that's something that I can easily fit into my space here, which is about 12 feet by 7 feet for the whole railroad. And this is something that I could not do in the same space in HO scale. So if you're looking for longer trains to run, you want to do more mainline stuff, definitely N scale is going to be a way to go, especially if you're space constrained. These are just a few observations from somebody who has been an N scaler since the 90s. Each scale has its ups, downs, and quirks. Now, what scale are you modeling? Because I know not all of you that watch me out here are N scalers, and I want to know what you think some of the quirks of your scale is. I want to hear what some of the quirks of HO scale are versus some of these other scales. It'll be interesting to hear those. Please leave that in the comments below. And you can also check out some of these videos. They should be really interesting to you. Thank you all so much for watching. Until next time, I'm Jimmy from the DIY Digital. Stay safe, be kind, drink some coffee, and happy railroading.